Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. I'm going to do another watch review today. Quick one. It's a review of the Fortis Flieger GMT from the late 1990s through to the early 2000s. First off, a tiny little bit about Fortis. Formed in 1912. It has nothing particularly special, just another Swiss watch brand. But in 1924, they became much more interesting. In a collab with John Harwood, the inventor of the first automatic movements, Fortis became one of the very first companies to really get into and to produce commercially available automatic watches. I'm going to talk a lot, in fact from now on, I'm going to talk a lot about watch companies claiming things and being one of, not the first, because of what comes next. Fortis claim in their documentation, and I've seen in some other places, that they're also the producer of the first waterproof watch in 1943. Now that rang alarm bells because I knew that Omega had done stuff earlier, and I knew that Rolex had done stuff earlier, and I did some quick research on waterproof, water resistance, and I found that that's a very, very murky and disputed area. So what I found was lots of people can make claims, and as long as they get to define the conditions of that claim, they're probably right, but they're probably a bit wrong too. So from now on, as I said, I'm just going to say that Fortis claim, or Rolex claim, or Omega claim, and I'll say that there's normally some basis for that. So 1943, Fortis claim to have produced the first waterproof watch, and there is some basis for that if you accept their assumptions. Then following on that kind of tooly, sporting references, Fortis went on in the early 60s to produce watches designed to go to space. That continued through to the 1990s, when Fortis were tying up with the Russian program and kind of being the watch of choice for the Russian program. And even now they've got a line of watches which has this tie-up to a future Mars mission, all of which is quite challenging for a brand which is entry level. I mean, we're talking you can get a Spacematic for like, what, $700 US brand new, right through to, I think the most expensive Fortis watch you can buy is probably about $3,000 or $4,000 US total. So we're talking an entry level brand that likes to be right at the sort of cutting edge of what you can achieve in terms of robustness and so forth. That is a recipe for going bankrupt, which Fortis almost did. So I think in 2017, though backs against the wall, thankfully they were able to get a debt restructure done and get taken over by a private investor. So Fortis continue to exist. They continue to exist as an independent company, producing these tooly watches which are very effective and efficient, and at the same time quite cheap. Normally you can't do all of that. Fortis seem to be holding it together for the time being, but we'll see what the future holds. So as I said, today we're doing a review of the Fortis Flieger GMT. I never remember reference numbers, so I'm going to be putting the reference number above my head right now. This is a watch that was kind of current during the mid-1990s through to the early to mid-2000s. In style, it's a very simple round pilot's watch, a lot of Flieger overtones. It is clearly styled, and I'll keep coming back to this through the review. It is clearly styled to be a tool watch. This is not just we've designed a watch to be a tool. This is a watch that's designed to look like a tool, and that's what, as I said, we'll come back to that a lot. Market, entry-level mechanical GMT. New, these things were $1,500 to $2,000 US. Today they're a fair bit cheaper, but again we'll talk about the price later. In terms of functions, what can it do? Time, date, GMT. That's really about it. In terms of GMT, this is a very simple ETA 2893-2 movement, which means it's a jumping GMT hand. That is not an optimal setup for an actual travel watch. It'll do the job, but you'll be stuck with some futzing around to change the time when you travel. It does have a quick set date, which is important because in some GMT implementations you lose that ability. On the other hand, what it means is you can only advance the GMT hand forward, you can't take it backwards. In terms of legibility, I think it's very good with really only one quibble. You've got this really big flat dial and super high contrast Arabics with a flat as a tack crystal. It's not the most exciting, not the most interesting, but my God, you can pretty much see everything at all times. The Roman sword hands, I think, are good. I quite like these. The width means that you can see the hand quite easily, but the way it narrows down to a point at the end of the sword means that you can also be quite precise about what time it is when you look more carefully. I do wish that the hour hand was a little bit longer. Now, I kind of get the feel that the shorter hand also points to the inner 24-hour ring, so you get that kind of military time as well. Nice idea, and I kind of get it, but I would have personally preferred the hour hand to be longer, go past that inner ring and go closer to the outer Arabics, so that you can get a better view at a glance of exactly what the time is where you are right now. The GMT hand is absolutely nothing special. In fact, it probably couldn't be simpler. It's a little orange stick, but it's a little orange stick that stands out. It's really easy to see, comes right up and touches those 24-hour markers. So it's not attractive. I don't think it's meant to be. It does the job, and that's what it's intended to do. And more importantly, it looks like it's only intended to do the job. And that's probably the key to every design decision on this watch. The date is a little hard to see, not the end of the world. Personally, I'm ambivalent about whether a watch has a date or not, and particularly with a GMT watch, the date becomes a little bit problematic. But then on the other hand, if you're traveling, perhaps knowing the date is doubly important. I don't know. If it's important to you, you should know the date isn't the easiest to see. There you go. Power reserve, 42 hours, which is exactly on the standard. It's a standard ETA movement, so you shouldn't be surprised that which is the standard movement of everything in this kind of marketplace. If you go up, start looking at the latest Tudors, yes, you'll start getting 60 to 70 hour power reserves. On the other hand, you're paying 4 or 5 times as much, so perhaps it all balances itself out. Okay, so now let's think about the versatility. So who can wear this and wear it when? In terms of wearability, it's 40mm case diameter, 47mm lug to lug, and it's only 11mm thick. That actually makes it incredibly wearable, both in terms of the wrists that you can wear it on, but also the situations you can wear it in. At only 11mm thick, it will slide under most cuffs. So if you're wearing a suit, albeit with this kind of very disciplined tooly look, it will fit. In terms of robustness, it's 316L steel like they all are. Mineral crystal, which is a shame. If I look really closely at mine, I can actually even see a few little chips around the edge of the bezel. So this is not just a theoretical issue. That mineral crystal is a weak point, and at some point I'm going to have to do something, and it would be wonderful if someone happens to make a sapphire crystal that will go in there. I would be doing that, and it's a bit of a down point on this watch. It's got 200 meters water resistance and a screw down crown, so that's actually, it's weird. It's got the mineral crystal, which is a bad thing, but then for what is ultimately a travel watch and a Flieger, 200 millimeters water resistance and screw down crown is actually really amazing. So it's this weird, it's kind of robust, but it's also kind of not. The one thing I would say is that having that water resistance does mean that this would work as a single watch solution if you're traveling. You don't need to supplement this with a diver if you're comfortable wearing something as tooly as this in a business meeting or going out to dinner. In terms of bands, it's hard to believe that something so tooly, so intended for use, doesn't come with drilled lugs. I don't understand why they made that decision when they made so many others clearly based around being able to use it in a wide variety of ways. It strikes me as a very odd decision. So now let's talk about the looks, and I've mentioned this, I've described this as the tooliest of tool watches a couple of times, but this is where I'm really going to emphasize it. It truly is the tooliest of tool watches. Now remember, this is a watch that was designed in the mid-90s, so we're well into the quartz period, and you know, not smartwatches yet, but certainly smartphones and things around. So there was no, this watch was probably never going to be actually someone's tool. They were always going to have some other timekeeper that they absolutely relied on. But that hasn't stopped the designers from treating this as if it was a strict, nothing but business tool. For example, we have super clear, super simple shapes in the design of the case. There's virtually nothing to talk about in this case. But then on the other hand, that's kind of the whole point of the design. It's really quite interesting how they've designed, I think that they've designed a watch specifically so that there's nothing, it doesn't look like it's been designed. The only decorative feature you have at all is this band around the mid case designed to break up the slab sides, but even that's been sort of fashioned to look as though it's a support structure for the lugs. The finish is just this solid bead blasting all over, and actually the way it's done, the case doesn't even look like it's made from steel. It looks like probably cast aluminium. I actually work in the aerospace industry, and every time I look at this watch, it reminds me of like a casing for a hydraulic pump or a sort of valve in a pneumatic system. It doesn't look like something I would wear on my wrist. It looks like something I would screw into, as I said, the hydraulic system of an airplane. Likewise, the dial looks like it's been lifted directly from a cockpit. Now, the weird thing is, it actually doesn't really look like it's just come from a cockpit. If you do jump on Google and like do a Google image search on cockpit clocks, they don't look like this, but it feels like they should look like this. Again, this is some really clever and really disciplined design to look like something it's not, and it does it so well. And that design carries through to the numerals. Super clear, super legible, a very modern look, completely sans serif, so there's nothing sort of decorative. And on top of that, you've got this incredibly thin bezel, which makes a 40mm and very wearable watch look way bigger and have far more wrist presence than you'd imagine it would. The date is really unobtrusive, and it doesn't add much to the face of the watch, but then on the other hand, does the date ever really add to the watch? At least it doesn't do a great deal of harm. And the crisp Roman sword hands are really nicely done. Black on the outside, lume filled in the middle. Some nice clever features to sort of make it, again, as I said earlier, that design makes the hands both stand out at a glance, but then at a more careful look, that the sword hands and the point that it comes to makes giving a very precise time very easy. Now, speaking of lume, I rarely talk about it. It's not really a big deal for me, but in this particular case, actually, it's kind of cool. So I'm going to put up a lume shot, which I almost never do, and the numbers, the hands are all fully lumed, and it gives it again this really cool design to be used in case of emergency look. It's just really clever. I really enjoy. This is probably the only watch I own where I actually enjoy looking at the lume in the dark. Now, the case back is absolutely nothing special. It is as plain as all get out, but then on the other hand, that's kind of the point, and I kind of like seeing the discipline of having this incredibly tool looking watch, this watch built for a purpose, even to the case back. Normally I love to see exhibition case backs, but in this particular case, with this particular design, I think it was a really great idea not to go for it. It really hammers home the message that's imposed all over this of, this is a watch that's made for business. This is a watch that is for rolling your sleeves up and getting your stuff done. On the wrist, though, it is interesting. That's where this incredible discipline of looking like the watch hasn't been designed, this careful design to hide the design, I think falls over, and the discipline works against the watch. In my opinion, the way the watch sits on your wrist and creates kind of tent poles, the band, rather than have it sit nice and flush. It shortens the band, which is a pain in the ass, and two, it does look a bit kind of jury-rigged and not quite right. Now, some people would say, actually, that's how I want my built for a purpose, built for work watch to look. I think it's actually gone a step too far, and it's taking that design to look undesigned and coming up with something that's not usable. And I think that was probably a bad call. Okay, now in terms of feel, we'll first off talk about the controls. Generally, they're pretty good. The crown's nice and big, it's easy to grip, it threads in and out easily enough, pops from position to position nice and cleanly, you know where you are. It is really wobbly though, and I don't know why. I don't know if that's an age thing. There is a design of a crown fitment system where there can be a clutch, which also gives it that kind of wobbliness. So maybe that's it. Maybe there's, I would like to do some more research into this. There are some watches that build a clutch into the winding mechanism that prevents it from overwinding. Okay, in the hand, this thing feels, again, I keep coming back to this idea, if it feels like an aircraft part, that beaded blasted finish gives it a soft, not the slick feeling of polish, it's kind of a satiny feeling in the hand. And again, it's this feeling of not decorative, just clean and silky and smooth. Okay, so the next one, and the most important one for any watch, is fundamentally how does it feel on the wrist. Okay, it's pretty good. I generally divide watches into 4 categories. Now, the biggest category is watches that feel okay, not particularly good, not particularly bad. Slightly smaller category is watches that for whatever reason feel particularly good. And then there's 2 tiny little categories on the end, watches which are unbearably bad and watches which are just unbelievably fantastic. This watch falls into the, yeah, it's okay. There's nothing particularly special. It's comfortable, but not especially so. The lug placement does mean that it wears a little high, and especially with a NATO, it can feel a little wobbly. On the other hand, the quite short lug-to-lug distance means that you can strap it down quite comfortably and quite snugly. So yeah, it's not great, but it's not terrible. Now let's talk about the build. The dial, it's still looking really clean. It looks really classy. I'll try and find a really high magnification image here, and you'll see that the lume's been applied incredibly crisply. This watch is probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years old, and it's still going really strong. The bezel, this is a problem. The crystal does sit just a little bit proud, which is okay, but I think there's a little gap, a tiny little gap between the edge of the crystal and the bezel itself, and I routinely find crap getting stuck in there. But worst of all, what that does is it creates a little edge of the bezel, an edge of the crystal, which again is only mineral crystal, and I have got a couple of little chips in there. So I think it would have been much nicer if they'd lowered the crystal a little bit, made it flush, and had no gap between the bezel and the crystal at all, or had the bezel, it would have broken up the look a little bit, but if the bezel had overlapped the crystal, protecting that edge, would have been a much smarter design choice. In terms of the case, it's really fine. Frankly, the designers could not have given the builders an easier job. They've set the bar pretty low and they've got over it. In terms of the movement, look, I'm no watchmaker. I can't judge whether this is a particularly good or badly built movement. I will tell you it's an ETA. The reputation there is completely solid. I'd be stunned if there was anything wrong with this build. Okay, in terms of ease of ownership, MSRP, I've got no idea. I believe a little bit of research tells me back in the day it was around $1,500 to $2,000, but it's not really relevant. These days, if you can find one, it'll be probably $700 to $800 US. They do come up every now and then on Chrono24 eBay, not super common. But what does that give you? That means you've got this really interesting and really disciplined design, a full ETA movement, GMT, date, time, a really standout piece, and you're paying $700 to $800 for it. Frankly, that's a micro brand territory, and you're getting that from a name brand, and it's great value. If you can get one of these and it's the style you want, the price is definitely right. In terms of maintenance, it's an untouched ETA movement. How bad can it be? My biggest concern is going to be that crystal In a perfect world, I'll be able to replace it with something made of sapphire when that time comes. Finding one can be tricky. The simple three-handed Flieger comes up quite commonly on something like Chrono 24. You'll see at any given time 2 or 3 for sale. I've noticed in the year or so I've had one of these, you find the Flieger GMT comes up. There'll be 1 or 2 every few weeks, every few months. So they're not super common. So they're harder to get, but then on the other hand, that just makes them way more desirable because you don't see a lot of them. Now at this point of the review, normally I talk about the extras. Now this was a second-hand watch I bought off eBay with a cheap-ass third-party band wrapped in bubble wrap inside an old glasses case, I believe it was. So I have no idea what the extras would be on this band, on this watch, in terms of what you might get as a band or bracelet, what you might get in terms of other packaging and other swag. Maybe you'll get a lot, maybe you won't get much. It's a second-hand watch, who can tell? Okay, this is a new segment I'm going to build into my reviews, and it's something that I'm going to call the authenticity factor. So how true to itself is this watch? I would assess overall this is an insanely authentic watch. First off, the first thing I think about here is transparency. That is, do you know where the parts come from? Do you know where the movements come from? Do you know and can you trust what you're being told about this watch? And the truth is, yeah, you can. It tells you where the movement comes from. It doesn't bullshit around being manufactured or anything like that. You know you're getting an ETA movement. You know you're getting mineral glass. You know you're getting a beaded blast finish. There's nothing hidden in here at all. Now, in terms of the design and is it true to itself, this is a really interesting one. So it's in the pilot watch / Flieger genre. Now there's really very little room for originality in there. As soon as you've decided that's what your genre is going to be, there's so many tropes about where the 24-hour bezel will, that inner ring of 24 hours is going to be. The use of the Arabics is all fairly common. There's nothing there. There's actually not a lot of scope to be insanely original in that layout. But then on the other hand, this watch does seem to play with the generic shapes and the generic placements quite well, so that when I look at this watch, it is itself. It's not trying to be something else. I don't look at this and say this is trying to be an IWC Mark 8 or this is trying to be anything else. It very much is itself within, albeit the pretty tight confines of the Flieger genre. So I suppose I'll give it the best marks it can possibly get, given that they've decided to make something like that. And in terms of being true to history, it is, again, it could not be more true to what a Fortis is and tries to be. We spoke earlier about the Fortis brand and its history of sort of tooliness, sports, pressing ahead, robustness, and all of those things come through in the design and build of this watch. So thinking in terms of the truth to itself, the truth to its history, and the transparency in what you're getting, this is a very authentic watch. Now, if you think about how this watch is going to be seen by other people, it's an incredibly serious, credible watch. It is definitely not a fashion or fashionable watch. No one has looked at this and tried to do some sort of bar house minimalism thing. This is pretty much exactly what it's supposed to be. It's a very blue collar watch. It's a hands-on. It's, on the other hand, I'd describe it as a technician's watch. Sticking with the theme, I can see this as the watch on the wrist of an engineer out there on the hangar floor continuing to maintain aeroplanes, or a bush pilot who's in his little ag plane doing low-level stuff out in the middle of nowhere. This is not really a watch that's designed to be worn by the engineer up on the 27th floor or by the pilot who's sort of sitting in the cockpit of an A380 monitoring computer systems. This is a watch for people who have a bit of grease under their fingernails. Okay, the next category I have here is what I call watch power. It's an idea which I developed in one of my earlier comparisons, and I'm going to bring it in here now. So when I talk about watch power, it's that ephemeral stuff that may not come through the watch itself, but is given to the watch by the environment around it. So in other words, you know, certain watches like Rolexes or an SKX have enormous watch power just because they are what they are. Got nothing to do with the inherent qualities of the watch. So what is the watch power that comes through here? I think there's some positivity, but not a lot. It's its own thing. It's not a pretend anything else, so it doesn't lose anything from a power point of view. But then on the other hand, it's a Fortis. It's an entry-level brand. It's not particularly well known outside of the watch community, and it relies on a third-party movement. So none of that brings any great status to this watch. And right now, pretty much the only thing a lot of people will have heard about Fortis is on the internet that, you know, it had a lot of debt problems last year. So if anything, that probably drags the power of this watch back down. Conversely, Fortis is reasonably well known and it is independent, which always generates a kind of cult interest in a watch and in a brand. But whilst this watch is in aviation, and that is probably Fortis's strong suit, ultimately it's the cosmonauts, the cosmonaut chronographs, which are kind of the culty members of the Fortis family. And so, and this watch doesn't really come with that power. So yeah, look, this is a watch which is kind of positive, but it doesn't ring any great bells, and no one's going to go out of their way to really, you know, give you a really solid nod of appreciation when they see this watch. Okay, so wrap this up. What's our verdict? Swipe right or swipe left? For me, it's a swipe right, not a hard right, for the simple reason that this design is so strict and so disciplined and so thorough. It's not going to be a watch for everyone. Really solid build, really good functions, and an interesting design. That's all good. But it's so disciplined at being a tool watch, from the shapes through to the bead blasted, the all bead blasted finish, the flat as a pancake crystal, the really simple loomed Arabics. It is an incredibly deliberately blue collar design, and if that's not what you're after, if you want something with a bit more zing, this watch simply doesn't have it for you. It is great value for what it is, though. You are getting all of those good things I told you about for a relatively low price of around about $700. Okay, I do have some minor issues with this watch, and I've mentioned them so far. The main issues that I'd have would be, they've been so true to the idea of not showing the design effort that I think the lug placement is poor. I think having the lugs coming kind of straight out of the mid case means that you get this tent poling of the band, and I think that's unfortunate. I think reimagining that design, dropping those lugs a little bit, canting them, would have been a better result and ended up with a better looking on the wrist and also a better fitting watch. I also think that the mineral crystal is unfortunate. Probably more a sign of the times, but I think if that had been sapphire, that would have been far better. And you have to acknowledge it's a traditional unmodified leaping GMT hand for the GMT functionality, which is suboptimal. It would have been wonderful if they'd been able to modify that so that you had a leaping local hour hand, which is a much better implementation of the GMT function. But at the end of the day, it's a really solid, really serious watch that is definitely its own thing. So if you're after something like this, I would strongly recommend you check this out. If you want that kind of workman, blue collar, roll your sleeves up, get some grease under your fingers, look like a serious guy doing serious work, it's for this price, I actually can't think of a better watch, if that's what you want. So anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this review. Hope it was helpful if you're in the market for a travel watch. I do note it is actually, as I should have emphasized this more, it is only a 40mm watch. There's been a lot of talk lately about not being able to get smaller watches, smaller travel watches. 40mm across, 11mm thick. I think it's probably one of the smallest going around. So anyway, I should have added that earlier, but anyway, for what it's worth. That's it. Hope it helped. If you want more of this, please subscribe. Please subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel and it's moving painfully slowly. I can do nothing else but create content. I need you to do the hard work of hitting that little subscribe button so that we can all go ahead together. Anyway, this has been Pete McConville. This is Not So Obvious Watches. Thanks very much. I'll see you later.